Well, hey there, and welcome back to the Another Step podcast. If we haven't met already, my name is Kyle, and this is a show all about the habits and rhythms and routines that help people become the person that they were created to be. It is really nice to be back in the flow of things. If you listened to last week's episode, we took a couple of weeks off for Christmas and the New Year just to try to get things moving on a sustainable rate. But today, you are in for a treat. This is an episode that I've been looking forward to really since we began this podcast. It's been a guest that I've been wanting to have on for a while. So today we're joined by Luke Norsworthy from Austin, Texas. Luke, how are you doing?
Great, man. Thanks for having me on. It's an honor.
Really, really grateful that you're here. I want to honor your time and make sure that we're able to have a conversation that is both beneficial but doesn't drag on too long, because I am notorious for being long-winded. Every time I hop on an episode like this, I'll tell my guests, like, hey, I'm looking at like an hour 10, something, and then pretty quickly the episode's turned into like an hour 25, and I realized like I got to tone some things down. But you and I were talking just before we hit record, and you are actually a huge reason on why I'm doing a podcast today. You started a podcast several years ago. We're going to link everything in the description of this video or in the show notes of the podcast. The show used to be called Newsworthy with Norsworthy, but now it's called the Norsworthy Podcast, helping people navigate faith in a modern world, and it's incredible. But what I would love to hear is the backstory on how you got into podcasting, where this whole thing came from. So I'd love to hear that story. I know you've shared it before, but I'd love for our listeners to hear it.
Yeah, well, thank you for listening. I appreciate that. The backstory is, it was a few years ago. That was a very kind way for you to say. It was like a decade ago when I started, and it was really the dark ages of podcasting. I remember having to email people and say, this is what a podcast is. It's good for you. I'm not like trying to catch you. Like it's not bad. It's good for you. I started in the fall of 10 years ago. And wow. I remember like a few months after my first episode, it was January. And I remember asking 22 people who all said no to me to be on the podcast. 22 people. And it wasn't because they were rude or jerks. It was just because people didn't know what it was. Also, I was like starting. And so the idea of something that had not much of a track record in something that people were unfamiliar with, it was a different world with podcasting. And so the reason I started is because I had questions with my faith, and I'm a pastor now. I was back then. And I was looking for people who could help me navigate my own faith. And so in many ways, like the vision for the podcast was somewhat self-serving. When I started, the questions that I was asking are different questions than I am asking now. I'm 42 now. When I was in my early 30s, as a pastor, trying to make sense of faith that, got me started in the world, but it wasn't working that way at that time. And I needed people who could help me navigate faith for myself. And I read a book by a guy named Richard Beck, who is a psychology professor at ACU. And the book is entitled The Authenticity of Faith. And I read it and I thought, man, I would love to have an excuse to talk to Richard Beck about the book. And the podcast was a medium to do that. And I've been fortunate enough to be able to talk to a lot of people over many years that helped me and helped me make sense of a faith that I needed some guidance for. And, along the way, 10 years later, 500 plus episodes later, I've had a lot of fun and met a lot of great people. And it is what it is now.
Dude, hearing your story again, I know I've heard you tell it on your show before. You talk about asking self-serving questions and reaching out to people for self-serving reasons. And I feel like you're reading my mail, because I feel the exact same way with some of the people that I've reached out to. Really, it's been like, I just want an excuse, like, to spend an hour with this person and
Sure.
to be able to like pick their brain on some things. Because very similarly, I'll be 30 this year, which is kind of this very strange shift for me. I'm kind of moving into that, like, I'm not the young guy anymore, but I'm still not the seasoned whatever. And I'm trying to ask some of these questions, like, how do I be a good dad? I've been really wrestling with this tension of goodness versus greatness. and the way my brain is wired as an Enneagram 3, I'm always trying to like jump into the next thing that's going to make people believe that I'm adequate or that I'm good enough or that I'm worthwhile. And I'm trying to settle more in my next decade of life and just learning to be in the language of others, like a non-anxious presence, to be a good father, a good friend, a good pastor. And what that means for me is I want to find people who I look up to and admire, and just have an excuse to sit down with them and find out what's been working for them. That's where some of the rhythms and habits and things come in, is like, surely there are, in the words of Ruth Haley Barton, like sacred rhythms that will lead us in that particular direction. So thank you for, I can't believe it's been a decade. Truly, I was like, oh, it was 2017 or 18, surely. But wow, I mean, a decade of committing to something like that certainly brings up, like, for you to do 500 episodes of something, there is resilience, there is commitment, there is perseverance through it. Were there ever times where you found yourself being like, I'm not sure if this is worth it? Or did you find enough like value and benefit for yourself that's what kept you moving?
I am by nature a routine person, and routines, like they can get established and concretized relatively quickly with me, just my personality type. And you talk about like my routines and like, hey, doing it for 10 years. I've kind of taken my foot off the brake over the last few months with the podcast, and I'm okay with that. And so it's kind of weird to talk about that while I'm in like having some personal transitions around the podcast, and I'm not really sure what the like next step is and all that. So with that being said, you know, for the first 10 years, it was just what I did. And to the point where I don't know if it was always good. I'm not a big like baseball fan. I don't know the sport extremely well. But I know Cal Ripken Jr., when I was a kid, set a record for most consecutive games played. And I always thought that was really admirable. And as I'm coming to understand Sabbath and rest, and now how modern sports scientists talk about the importance of rest, and I've heard some people go, that was really cool for him to set that record. I don't know if it was the best thing actually for his career or actually for the Orioles, because we see a lot of athletes now who are understanding you have to rest. And one of the things I learned in my late 30s about fitness is you can't work out every day. Like if you don't give your body a rest, it's actually detrimental for your further health. So you might think, oh, I'm going to keep working out. I'm going to grind every day. I'm going to be a David Goggins kind of person and, you know, whatever. That's cool for him. But most of us have to follow the same rhythm that our creator followed, which is you need some breaks. So for me to talk about how to have a routine with the podcast, it was just like, that's what I was going to do. It's going to get done. And so that's how I have 500 plus episodes. It was just like, I'm going to find a guest every week and we're going to make it happen. Right. And, you know, for me, the next question is like, okay, you can do that, but like, what's most effective? And there's a book that I'm going to be putting out in a couple months. And I knew for me to put everything into the book that I needed to put into it, I had to pull away. And so part of like the podcast taking a break is, hey, this is not on the front burner right now. And if you want something to succeed, you have to be willing to put something else in a more dormant position, because you know, every yes is also a no to something else. And so there was a time where the only thing I wanted to say yes to was doing a podcast every week. And now there's other things that I'm able to say yes to as I'm changing my priorities. And that looks different with the routine of the podcast.
Right. Yeah. I can imagine that while I can imagine that maybe that is, it feels good to move on to something different, especially when it's something that you're excited about, because you are a gifted writer. I've got a couple of your books sitting right over here that have been a blessing to me. I based an entire series last fall or 2 falls ago on befriending your monsters with our youth ministry. And to this day, they still tell me that was one of their favorite series that we've done in the past couple of years. And I can't take any credit for it. I'm like, dadgummit, like Luke was that good. And I had to like put it up front. I'm like, this is not my material. It's all his.
No, what you say next time is, a friend of mine once said, and then you just go on with the entire series like it's your own. Because if you just say up front, a friend of mine said, you can do that. So,
well, there you go. You know, this is reminding me of so many podcasts where you are being able to call these well-known individuals your friends. So now I get to lump you into that category for me as well. Yeah. So, which is fantastic.
Pay it forward, man.
So what is it feeling like for you right now, making a shift to taking something where you've, for a decade, a season, and now it's becoming maybe something less? I mean, is that a difficult experience for you to focus on something different, or does it feel like it's a natural progression?
You know, I'm still doing podcast episodes. I record one today, and, you know, I'll continue to put them out. But there is something in me, that thing that makes routine make sense to me. It's also something that makes me obsessive to a detrimental state. And so, like many people will tell you, the very best things about you are often the worst things about you. And so for me to learn how to be at peace where I don't have everything to the level that I want, that's new. But part of that comes out of a journey of self-realization to understand the role that anxiety plays in my life. And anxiety helps you get things done. Anxiety helps me at 2:00 in the morning to remember that I need to put my toothbrush in my suitcase so that I don't forget it on my flight the next morning, which is helpful. I want to be able to brush my teeth when I'm on a trip, but sometimes telling anxiety that you can get a lot of things done, but it doesn't mean that I always have to let you sit in the front seat and make every decision is something that's new for me, and it's freeing for me. And so, it's different. And I think many people came on the other side of COVID and went, wait a minute, I don't know if I want to keep doing all the things that I was doing before, because there's something about flourishing and thriving that doesn't mean you say yes to everything. I had a moment where the church I was still a part of, I'm a pastor. That's my day job. We had a season where we had 2 services Sunday morning. That changed during COVID. And then we had a Sunday night service at a south part of town in a different location. And so I would get up, I'd preach 2 services, I'd go home and take a nap, I would wake up, and most days I would go swim a mile, and then I'd go preach our 5:00 service, and then I'd come home and I would finish next Sunday's sermon. Stupid routine. And so I did that for years, and there's a guy from our church who's 10 years younger than me. And he's like, so what's your routine? I'm telling him what I'm doing. And then he just asked this one question that literally left me puzzled. I didn't know what to say. And he goes, oh, okay. So you do this and then you do that. Is that sustainable? And I was just like, I got to go preach. Leave me alone. And, but to this day, I remember that being one of those sea change moments to go, okay, you might like how it makes you feel, but is this really the best thing for you? And it's those two things are not always the same.
First of all, I can't imagine. Luckily, we're still a 1-service church. I can't imagine preaching multiple services, period. Much less somewhere in between saying, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to go swim a mile. That sounds like a really great time. Can't say I've ever swam further than across the swimming pool. And maybe that's a fear of deep water. I don't know. But there's something underneath there somewhere. And yet, that was the question that your friend asked, it was the one that was sitting in the back of my mind. Like, how long could you actually sustain that? I remember listening to a podcast with John Tyson and John Mark Comer on the art of teaching. And they were talking about the effects of preaching multiple services over the course of the day. And both of them just made the point that after 2 or 3, you kind of forget what you've said. And you're just kind of moving through, whether it's just the momentum is carrying you or what exactly it is, you've kind of moved into a different world. Did you find that maybe that nap and swimming a mile did that recharge you enough to get through that final bit, or was it just something that was actually relatively simple?
You know, what's funny is that and we don't do that now, we're actually at 1 service, and I think I'm out of shape to preach 3 times anymore. I've done it a few times, I think at other places probably. Right. And I always felt like, oh, wow, there's a lot to this that I wasn't naming the actual physical toll it was taking on me.
Yeah.
I mean, the weird thing is sometimes I'd preach the first service. I would come in my office and I have 30 minutes and I would sleep for 10 minutes, 12 minutes, and then I'd wake up and that was just enough to make it seem fresh the next time. And, maybe all those things were my way of naming, I need to have some segment. And there's one of those like meathead productivity guys who's like, I've split my day into 4 days. And so by 8 o'clock, I've already done my first days of work. And then 8 to 12, I'm going to do another day's. And I'm like, bro, that is so dumb. Like, you're just saying words now. But there was something about that rhythm of taking a 10-minute nap and extra that probably had that effect on me. But
Sure.
Again, I could do that at 30 to 35, but I'm not doing that at 42 anymore. I can tell you that.
Right. I'll swim half a mile this time instead of a full mile. My goodness. So I've heard you talk before on, I think it was on Steve Carter's podcast, about your process when it comes to preaching. I still have not figured out how you memorize your sermons and preach without notes. I can't figure it out. I'm a pure manuscript guy because every word for me matters. I need it in the right place, all the things. And yet the people who I know who preach without notes don't seem to memorize. They seem to just kind of have their thoughts together. They know the flow and they'll kind of get it there. You're not that way. It feels like you memorize every word. Is that the case?
I wouldn't say every word, but I'm not guessing how I'm going to finish a sentence. I'm not guessing how I'm going to go from point A to point B to point C. Sure. Like I'm not doing any of that. I talked to someone once and I was like, well, how much similarity is like one service to the next for you? And this is a guy who Pentecostal tradition, probably had some notes on the stage, but he wasn't like manuscript kind of stuff. And he was like, it's maybe 80% or so. And I was like, I'm like 98, 99% the same between service to service. It's a parlor trick at this point. Honestly, doing the podcast helped me.
Okay.
Because there was one podcast where I was doing a live event next to Pepperdine University years ago with N.T. Wright, who was one of my absolute favorite theologians, most influential, biblical scholar in my life. And I was on someone else's podcast. There's supposed to be 5 of us on the dais. And, Tom Wright and myself ended up being the only 2 on the stage. And I was like, crap, I'm now having to like interview him. And I wasn't prepared for this. And there was something that shifted that went, okay, if you can survive this, you can survive being on stage by yourself. And so part of it is just like that 10,000 hours. Like I've done this for, sure. I was preaching every Sunday I started preaching when I was 18, preaching every Sunday at 19. So you do anything for 20 plus years, like you get some experience and some tricks of the trade. But I mean, I don't think one is better than the other, manuscript versus no notes. I mean, everyone just has their own form and fashion that works for them.
Yeah. So back to your Sunday though. And I will remain fascinated at your ability to preach as eloquently as you do, to the point and still do it with no notes. And I will keep my manuscripts because maybe it's an insecurity. Maybe it is. But you said a minute ago that you'd preach 3 times. You'd do your triathlon, Ironman in the middle of the day, and then you would finish the following week's sermon. How did you do that? Because I'm already in my mind, like, were you just that far ahead already on prep that you didn't have that much more to do, or did you just stay up a ridiculous?
It was like an hour more of work that I would do when I got home. The sermon was 80% of the way done. I had all like my main ideas. I'd already done all my biblical study. It was more just like polishing up the final bit of it. And my friend Jonathan Storment actually was the impetus for that idea. Jonathan Storment's a preacher friend of mine, and he would go up and work on his sermons on Sunday night. And I thought, oh, that's a cool idea. And so I adopted that from him. And, it worked for him. He's an extrovert, gets a lot of energy from being around people. Right. I personally am an introvert, and so I get a lot of energy from solitude. And, I did it for a couple of years, definitely wouldn't do it anymore. But yeah, like I do typically work pretty far in advance, which is part of the reason I can memorize, because Thursday I'll go over my sermon. I won't look at it again until Saturday night. I'll look at it on Saturday night. And I'm just polishing things up at this point. I'm not trying to figure out how to finish or what I'm going to do. It's just, all right, how do we clean this up and make it better? And that's part of the way that my weekend enables me to memorize.
That's really, really interesting. How far out are you working on sermons? Is this just series by series for you? Or are you like, I know what I'm preaching, at least, topically what the series is, like a year in advance?
I have this series that I'm finishing now. I've got the stuff I'm doing leading up until Easter. I've got the ideas for what I want to do after Easter. I have these folders where I'm just like dropping ideas in for months in advance. But I typically like to have the entire series mapped out before I start it, just in case I need to turn, like, hey, this sermon, instead of being the first week, should be the last week. So I have a board that has the next 10 Sundays, and I've got a checklist system that lets me know, like, you're 20% where you should be, 40, 60, 80%, and then you're done. And so I have that. It's a weird thing that works for me. I work with routines. I've said that already. And so my sermon writing does the same thing, because the creative process with sermon writing, it's hard to say, like, oh, what did you get done today? How much should I do? And so I created a system that enables me to go, okay, this is where you need to be 20% out, 40% out, 60% out, 80% out. And that helped me make sermon writing manageable, because for me, I don't think I can write a sermon in one setting. I know it takes multiple days. And so I just try to calcify something that lets me know this is how much I should be getting done for today's work on any sermon. And it works for me. There's people who do things completely different. And part of the power of routines is that you start with something that you get from someone else. And then you figure out, this is what works for me. And manuscripts, that's what works for you. You stick with that. And then, no notes is what works for me. And there's some people, everyone has their own thing. But what we all have to figure out is, how do we create a system that enables us to flourish? Because we do not rise to our goals, but we fall and we ascend to our systems. And so creating a sustainable system, I think, is the most important question that we all need to be asking.
That's a really good insight. This year, I am kind of on this, if I can use the word hellbent. I'm a bit hellbent on slowing down, if that's a reasonable way of describing it. I'm kind of getting to the point, maybe it's turning 30, maybe it's I'm just being a little bit more self-aware than I have in the past, that if I want to be sustainable, if I want to be in your shoes at 42, talking to someone 10 years behind me, if I want to still be in it, I know I'm going to have to create sustainable rhythms. Yep. And over time, I've done an okay job of that, but I have a really big tendency of just saying yes to whatever. Let me prove my worth to you. And I'm trying to get away from that. So part of what I'm doing this year is trying to have a theme of whether you call it systems or structure or habits or whatever it is. In the Jesus tradition, it would be like a rule of life. Sure. Like, let me have this trellis that will support the rest of my life. Yeah. So whether it's sermon planning, or it's my life with my family, or it's my mental health or whatever, I'm trying to build these systems and practices where I can get things out of my brain that don't need to be there. I can get things living on a Notion database or on a notebook sitting on my desk or whatever, that don't need to live in my brain, but when I need to access them, Tiago Forte calls it like a second brain. Yep. And trying to live there so that I can live more fully and more present and more open to the people around me. I am an introvert as well, so people just flat out exhaust me. Love them to death, but I can only, small bursts. Sure. And I think, at least my hope, is that over the course of the year, having built these rhythms and practices and disciplines into my life, it will actually enable me to spend more quality time with the people that I care the most deeply about. Sure. So that's really where the impetus of this podcast came from, because I've already had really great conversations with friends of mine, and I've implemented things that they've put into their lives. Otherwise, I would have never heard them. Yeah. So I love this idea of being 10 weeks out, being able to plan percentage wise. Hey, here's where I need to be, and how to have that visual, I think, is huge for people to see. Here's where my life is currently sitting, and I would imagine that a very small number of our audience is preaching or teaching on a weekly basis. Sure. I would imagine most of them are driving into work to do anything else on any given Tuesday. But having some kind of system in place, having some kind of rhythm in their life where they can see, hey, I've got goals that I'm pursuing, whether it's a fitness goal or here's, I want to lose a certain amount of weight or whatever it is, having that visual representation. Here's where my life currently sits, and here's how I can take steps in that direction, I can imagine would be really helpful. So I love that we're able to take something from preaching and apply it to people's everyday experience. So we've got 500 episodes of podcasting under your belt. You've got what I'm guessing is like 6 or 7 years of preaching. That's never mind. Still trying to do the math. If you start at 19, how are you 42 now? Anyway.
Yeah, it's dumb. I spent my college years being far too serious. That was my problem.
But didn't you like go to college early or something like that? Am I getting the story correct?
Yeah, I was at college when I was 16, and which is a whole nother podcast of why? What are you doing? What are you doing with your life? So yeah, I got there early and started preaching. My first sermon I ever preached was the Sunday after. I went to Abilene Christian University. We don't have fraternities. We had social clubs. And after the big hazing weekend for my social club was my very first sermon. And so that's, 17, 18 years old, after midnight and all the hazing up all night and all that. We don't call it hazing now, but it definitely was. And by next year at 19, I was preaching every Sunday at a little country church in Moran. So yeah, it's been very long.
That's incredible. Because, nowadays it feels like people don't commit to things for a year, much less, that kind of length of time, particularly things that we start when we're 19. I'm sure there were things that I was doing at 19, 20 that I left in the past a really, really long time ago. Mm-hmm. So how have you found that 500 episodes of a podcast, an extended period of time, even from a young age of preaching, how has that formed you? How has that shaped you? How has that made you, how has that shaped you into the person that you are today?
Do you want the positive or the negative? Which one do you want me to start with?
You pick. I'll let you pick.
Dealer's choice. Okay. Since you brought up the fact that I did kind of start things a little bit early with my life, I think one of the negatives of that is that, when you have successes in certain areas of your life, they often come at the expense of a failure in another part of your life. And I think me growing up fast with, getting a college degree when I was 20 and starting preaching at this age, there were some emotional parts of myself that I think were underdeveloped by the overemphasis on other parts being quote unquote, fully developed or further along developed than other parts. And so I think there are things that at 42, I'm figuring out about myself that a lot of people, if they had a more normal maturing process, they figured out before me. And so I don't think it's all, it's not all wins and it's not all losses, but I think there's both along the way. And so I think there's something that is really peculiar that happens to you if you think that you're someone who can get in front of a group. And at 21, I was preaching to an audience of 1,000 people. And there's some weird things that does to you if you think you're 21 and you can get on a stage and tell people this is what God is telling you to do and this is how you're supposed to live your life and this is what's right and this is what's wrong. And there's something really problematic about having a microphone in front of your face because the human voice is created so that it can communicate to dozens of people. It's not created so that it can communicate to hundreds of people. A microphone is a technological advance that gives us more power than the human voice typically is able to do. Obviously, some people have big voices and they can do that, whatever. But the more poetic point I'm trying to make is just because you have the ability to do something and you have successes in a certain area of your life, don't think that it doesn't come with a cost. And the cost of being a precocious pastor is that you don't allow yourself the normal gestation period of a disciple who's a young man trying to figure out what it means to follow Jesus. And so I think there are some relational things that probably got stunted along the way. Luckily, I've been very fortunate to have an amazing wife I've been married to for over 20 years now, and some very amazing friends that have been very gracious to me along the way. But that's the negative. I think the positive of doing it for this long is honestly the best part about ministry for me is not only getting to help people, but the fact that I am in community with a lot of people who are committed to Jesus. And the other option for my life was probably going to law school. And I don't think I would have survived being a precocious lawyer. I think it would have consumed my soul. And for some people, they can do that just fine. But I think it probably would have been pretty destructive, because I don't think without the guardrails of being surrounded by very godly men and women who are older than me and the same age, peers and mentors alike, I would be in serious trouble.
So it's interesting that you say that the other option was law school. Are you familiar with the show Suits that has now made a resurgence on TV?
Netflix. I've watched a couple episodes. I've watched a few episodes. Yes.
Okay. Whether or not I'm outing myself for having watched Suits, because if you've watched it, the godliness level,
it's not high.
Not necessary.
I wouldn't call it high. No.
Well, I wouldn't call it. However, anyway. Me and my wife were sitting down to watch Suits the other night, and I was talking about how I had this interview with you coming up, and it just so happened that we were watching Suits, and it comes up, and she says, "Kyle, Harvey Specter looks like Luke Norsworthy," and I stepped back and said, "Wow, they really do." So I'll take that as a compliment, because my wife really likes Harvey Specter.
I've been called worse things. He's the older lawyer who brings on like the young, brilliant guy, right?
Yeah. So so Harvey Specter is like the Bruce Wayne wearing a power suit, super hotshot lawyer, brings on the dude with a photographic memory. If you're unfamiliar with the story,
I'll take that. I've been called much
both
worse.
Both of them,
much worse.
Dude, I feel that pain in more ways than I'd like to admit.
Okay, so I watched like probably 5 episodes of the show a couple months ago, and then the first thought was how he treated the young guy. I remember I had an intern a couple of years ago, who's a kid from our church. He said, "Luke, let me intern for you for the summer." I'm like, "All right, whatever." And I remember being in an elders meeting. He came in and he started talking. I was like, "You don't get to talk. You're just listening." And then one of my favorite elders, may he rest in peace, he's since passed, but he said, "Luke, the way you treat him reminds me of the locker room." And I was like, I take that as a compliment, because that's where I learned my mentoring from. It just treat him like a rookie, treat him like a freshman. And that's how so that's how I roll. So I appreciate the compliment. Please tell your wife, thank you. And I'll take it if I can get it.
So good. So on a more serious note, separate and apart from the Suits reference, I think there is something to say about elevating younger voices. And I'm at tension with this, because like you, I have been doing some form of ministry since I was like 19 years old, full-time on staff as soon as I graduated college. Went straight from undergrad straight into grad school at ACU. I mean, just very quickly started doing some of these things. And I was listening to a podcast this morning, I think, and the two guys were talking about the ego and the shadow, and how we're living, the way we live our lives. The goal should be to close the gap between our ego and our shadow, like the person that we project to the world and we want people to see ourselves as. But it's also a positive thing, because it's what gives us ambition and helps us move forward in life. But also like the shadow, which is like the true side of ourselves that we don't always want people to see. And it's usually only this select community that is privy to that side of ourselves. And they were talking about how monks take a vow of poverty, and maybe we should learn to take a vow of obscurity, in the sense that instead of using platforms to reach all of these people that we'll never ever get to physically see in person. Maybe we should pull a Eugene Peterson and just focus purely on a local group of people and spend time pastoring and shepherding them, because those are the people we actually have relationship with. Well, one of the guys said, I was a youth pastor, so if you're a youth pastor listening to this, don't take this the wrong way. But then he begins to ask the hard question, like, should we take guys who are straight out of college, straight out of Bible college, 20, 21, 22, and put them into these platform roles, whether it's as a youth pastor or as a teacher in front of a group of people, because it already gets them in the performative mindset. It already gets them in this, let me find a way to let the ego grow, and let me find a way to show people, that I'm worthwhile or whatever, instead of doing like what the monks would do and go spend 20 years, sweeping floors and praying. And it was an interesting thought experiment for me, because I was the 21-year-old who, for some strange reason, they looked at me and said, yeah, let's have you pastor our students. I still have no idea why they thought that was a good idea. And yet I'm 29 years old and still doing the exact same thing, and find that I know less now than I think I ever have. So I'm fascinated by the ways that God uses even our flaws and our weaknesses. And I cringe at some of the stuff that I used to teach. I look back at some Evernote files from, 2015, 16. And I was like, did I say that? Like, that was borderline heresy. Like, why did anybody think it was a good idea to put me in front of people?
That's funny.
And yet, by God's grace, he continues to work on us. So there's no doubt that you wear a lot of hats. We've already talked about a couple of them: as a podcaster, as a pastor, but you're a dad and a husband and a friend, and you're one of the fittest 42-year-olds that I know. And you do it all in the garage gym. And I'm like, yeah, I hope that I'm halfway there when I'm 42. So other than like these consistent practices of working on messages and having the visual representation, everything, what other rhythms, what other habits are conducive for you to help you become the person that you are right now?
I would say not working on Friday, taking a Sabbath on Friday and being pretty diligent about that, of trying to not engage with anything work related, trying to stay off phone, email, that sort of stuff on Friday, trying to not just be absent from that, but trying to be, more importantly, present to God. I think that's a big commitment that I'm very glad that I've invested in. There are some quote unquote big guests that I wasn't able to ever schedule with because I couldn't do anything on Friday, and I'm happy about that. I'm happy that July I have the privilege to step away from preaching. Older brother in preaching named Chris Siebman said, hey, save up your Sundays off and stack them together. And so I do that in the month of July, and that's really important. This past summer, I didn't realize how burnt out I had gotten until it was week 3 of, I think there's 5 Sundays in July of last year. Week 3, I was like, oh, I'm really excited to preach again. I really want to preach. And I hadn't felt that in months. It was just like, I just had, turned the factory on, which is how I write sermons. Like, you do this day and this day and this day, and you move checklists along the system. And, I needed to step away from that. So Sabbath every week, and then a prolonged break from preaching, really helpful for me. Obviously, daily prayer has become even more important to me. I have a routine that I've been doing probably for the last 6 or 7 months that has become really life-giving for me in ways that my prayer life didn't have before. And so a sort of daily prayer time of silence, of I think fitness is an important part of my life, and I have a garage gym, but also I've been practicing Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu for the last 4 years or so. And one of the benefits of that is that I have a community of people, and they all know me as a pastor, and a lot of them show up at church services, and they always make all the pastor jokes that you'd expect at a gym such as that. But it's really important for me to be in the life of a community where I'm not the pastor and I'm not functioning as the authority. It's an opportunity to engage with people in a way that you don't when you're a pastor, because people expect you to be something. And obviously, like, I'm a pastor wherever I am. And this past Christmas Eve, I showed up at church, and I noticed one of my buddy's car there. It was the only one that he's an Indian dude who's Hindu, and so he had a gold elephant on the dash. And I was like, there are not a lot of those typically in our parking lot. And I was like, it's a very nice car, and so I knew it was him. But I walk in, and there's like 5 people from my gym who showed up at Christmas Eve. I was like, it's so great to see you guys here, and it's really, really neat. But so I am a pastor wherever I go. But what I'm trying to say is, where you're not the authority and you're just one of the dudes, I think that's really helpful for me.
Wow. Sabbath has been one of those that our family has really tried to commit to. I actually, interestingly enough, I'm teaching on Sabbath at our church this Sunday.
Nice.
We've done these kind of collective class times where we're trying to instill some healthy disciplines to start the year. So we've done prayer and community and hospitality, and we're going to finish up with Sabbath. And I realized pretty early on that you can't authentically teach about something unless you're authentically living it first, or at least it's really hard to, and for people to buy into what you're saying. And I don't know if this is the case for you, but Sabbath has been one of the most difficult practices to incorporate into my life because of I've always got to be doing something. Dude, I have a terrible tendency, and if my wife is listening to this in a couple of weeks, like, she's gonna be like amening me as I'm saying it. Like, I have a terrible tendency of, let me get one more thing, let me pull up my phone, let me send one more text, I got this thought, let me write it down really quick, and I cannot stand that about myself, because I want to be at home just to be at home. So like, I've got to do the whole like set a focus mode on my phone where it basically just becomes a dumb phone for the day. Step away from social media for the full 24 hours. And while it is one of the most difficult, because I can feel the resistance pushing back, like, you need to do something, you need to, be something for somebody else. It's also been the most life-giving. 2 weeks ago we had kind of faded off of the practice of Sabbath for the holidays and all the things. And I was feeling it. Like, you feel it in your body. And then we came back around last week and said, you know what? We need to get back into this. Like this, it's been proven that it's life-giving for us. And it was like 2:00 in the afternoon. I hadn't touched my phone all day. We had done nothing. And I felt my body physically feel at peace. I don't remember who originally coined the term, but and what the story behind it was, but like, you felt your soul catch up with your body. And that was what that moment was like. And I don't think most of us have fully experienced that. We'll take a day off, but we still fill it with stuff. We do the honey-do list on Saturday or whatever, and trying to get people to buy into that it's not always let's keep feeding the machine is a really difficult one. And yet it's been beautiful. Do you have like particular practices, like things that you do every Sabbath? Like for us, I typically fast most days, like in the morning, intermittent fasting type stuff. But like Saturday, it's pancake day. Like, we're going to do the full breakfast, all the things. Nice. Do you do things like that? Like every Saturday, this is something that you delight in?
So typically my Sabbath is on Friday. And so what I recently been trying to do is breakfast with my wife in the morning, kids to school. After the kids go to school, breakfast with my wife. And then I'll either work out before that or take a nap, go to jiu-jitsu, pick up the kids. What would be the analog to you with productivity is me sharing my feelings. And there's this old concept of agera contra, which is that which is hardest for you to do, like, is like you have to fight against the resistance. And so Sabbath is easier for me than it is for you. But what's really difficult with me is sharing my feelings. And so to go to breakfast and to actually share my feelings with my wife, or to say, this is how I actually feel, it sounds very elementary to some of your listeners and maybe to you, but it's taken me work to get there. And so the thing that I have to fight against, the resistance that says, no, this is uncomfortable, it's not intuitive to you, is actually a very basic thing of like connecting with people on a genuine human level and go, hey, I was scared about this, or hey, I feel this way about the future, or hey, this actually hurt my feelings. So those are the things that I find myself where I get the same sort of, you describe the feeling of like your soul catching up with your body. I do that when it's talking about my feelings. We're all having to figure out the things that we're working against, and threes and sevens, you know, it's different, but it's all the same journey.
No, true. I definitely, as somebody that does not process feelings very well, like, I have to be really intentional about doing that. And I think this is what you're tapping into, is like stepping into that, sitting across the table from the person who you are closest with, who knows you better than anybody else in the world, who you can be more vulnerable with in the entire world, and taking that intentional time on a weekly basis to say, here's where I'm at. I think that stretches across personality types or Enneagram numbers or Myers-Briggs or anything else.
Sure.
And I think it's something we all should do quite a bit more. I am fascinated at the ways that you manage it all. I don't, between podcast episodes and sermons, and at least from a distance, you seem like you're a pretty great dad. You seem present. You seem like you are aware of the world around you in a way that so many people are not, especially pastors and those of us who are in creative spaces, because it's really easy just to get tied up in the things that we do or the things that we create. And yet you found a way to navigate that all. So whether it's the practice of Sabbath that's brought that out in you, or it's a weekly jiu-jitsu class where you're able to choke some people out, it seems to be working for you quite well.
I think physical violence is a really important thing for all of us. I'm joking, but no, I mean, jiu-jitsu is a lot of fun. It's a fun game, but I appreciate you saying that. One of the weird things is I've had people say for years, "Oh, Luke, you're always so busy. You're so busy. You're so busy," and I never stopped to listen to think. I just thought this is how like life is. Like I feel like we're all this busy, and after literally hearing that for years, I finally thought, "Oh yeah, like this is like it is kind of busy." And I think we use that in America as kind of like a compliment. Hey, I'm busy. How you doing? I'm just busy, and I think that's not necessarily a compliment for the spiritual life. And so I'm starting to say no to things that help me be more present. And I'll be honest, like being a dad is my the favorite thing that I do. It is the best thing that's ever happened to me. And I think the sheer terror of feeling like, oh crap, like my oldest is going to be out of high school in 3.5 years. And we have a trip every July that we've been able to do to go back. We used to live in Florida. My first job was there in Florida. And we go back to the same spot and just going, crap, I only have like 3-4 of these before. It terrifies me. And I had a buddy I went to college with, his name Mark Rogers, who 2 years ago was with his family driving his truck in Abilene, Texas, and a guy who had a history of unsafe driving hit him. His car crashed, and he passed away. And every fall, I would go up and do a retreat for his campus ministry because I want to hang out with him. One of the things I've learned is that the friends you keep are the friends you keep on your calendar. And so this yearly retreat was a way to keep that friendship on the calendar. I'd see him once a year. Good dude. We've known each other for 20 plus years. And when he died, it was a lot for me because he too had 3 kids who were probably about the same age as yours currently are right now, maybe a little bit older. And his brother's an artist, a graphic design guy. And to help like with some of the family costs, he put a shirt out and it said, make your mark. And again, my friend's name was Mark. And so I have that shirt at a part in my closet where I see it every day. And it's just a daily reminder that like, this isn't forever. And to be grateful for the moments that you have. And in many ways, our own mortality can be one of the greatest drivers to despair, or it can be something that drives us to gratitude. And it's a lot harder to have a teenage daughter than it is to have an elementary school daughter, from my experience. And I find myself looking at that shirt going, all right, like this isn't forever. And so you're going to savor and enjoy whatever it's going to look like for you. And sometimes one of the greatest ways to find gratitude is unfortunately through pain. But like Richard Rohr says, the way of transformation is either the way of love and prayer, or it's the way of suffering. And one of the things I've started to do is find a whole lot more gratitude, because I'm more aware of the finitude of this whole thing, and I don't want to miss it.
I swear, it feels like time speeds up. And I'm sure in your experience, it probably feels like just yesterday. If you could look back, it was, the day you brought your daughters home from the hospital. It seems like you blink and years pass by. I mentioned before we started recording, my middle daughter's 4. And 4 years ago, like literally 2 months before the world shut down with COVID, we adopted her from Arizona. And every year it's like this steady reminder. And maybe it's because of how hectic and heavy that experience was, and yet how beautiful it was at the same time. Every year we're like, how has it been 4 years since that happened? And yet it's like you blink and they're 6 inches taller than they were. Yeah. My brother just had a baby, or his wife just had a baby, last October. And I often get to go over and play uncle, which is just awesome, because you get all of like the tiny baby snuggles and everything else. But then when there's a dirty diaper, you just hand them back, and it's fantastic. Yep. 100%. But it feels like just yesterday that I was holding my daughters and my son that way. And if I'm not careful, I will overly romanticize that, and wish for a day in the past that's no longer, and then thus miss out on what's right in front of me. Those moments don't happen as often, because usually I'm romanticizing what's going to come. Like, oh, what kind of life are we going to have? But I want to be the kind of person, I want to be the kind of dad that is just fully present. And I'd like to believe that little markers like the shirt from your friend's memorial, or a day like Sabbath, or a daily gratitude list or something, are like physical ways that we bring ourselves back into the present. And keep ourselves from looking too far forward or looking too far back. So I love that you've been able to articulate that, and to bring out, even in suffering, even in pain, those are moments that kind of recenter us and resettle us.
For sure.
So I want to make sure that we're honoring your time, because you have places to be here in the evening. So every episode, I like to finish up with what I have lovingly referred to now as rapid fire-ish questions, because very rarely do they actually end up being rapid. They end up lasting as long as anything else does. So just a series of questions, and luckily you've seen them, so hopefully you've got some pretty good feedback for them. Anything that you reference, we'll be sure to list. Please do.
Can I interrupt? I don't like to read questions beforehand, because I like it to just kind of, hey, this is going to be fun. And so I'm going to give you an answer.
Better.
It's going to be very rapid, but no disrespect to the process. Some people like it. I'm a 7. I like to be surprised. So let's do this together.
Dude, I love this. This makes it even better. Okay. So, what is one book, and you can't say the Bible, because you're a pastor and that's just the cop-out answer. What's one book that you think everybody should read?
Okay. There's a book, Martin Laird. It's a book on prayer that has changed my life. I think I have it right here. Title is Into the Silent Land. Martin Laird. I'm giving this plug for the book, even though I've emailed the guy and he never responded to my invitation via my podcast. It's a book on prayer. It drastically influenced and opened me up to a way of the contemplative life that I didn't have before. So that's the one. And then every book that's been on my podcast, every one.
Every single one of them. That's a lot of books. That's like could fill the shrimp. Okay. What is one movie that you think everybody should see?
Elf. I mean, Elf is it's the Christmas movie. Watch Elf. I mean, why would you not watch Elf? I was going to say like Hotel Rwanda, and that's pretty dark. I say that I've got a bunch of Rwandan friends who are that we are part of church together. I used to really love that movie, and then it's just like, oh, that the story is even more real. Good Will Hunting, obviously, that's a great one. But I mean, I'll be honest, like Batman, I love Christopher Nolan's Batman. Like those are great.
Yes.
Do we have to be serious? Like what kind of answers?
No.
Okay.
This is your answer.
Elf.
You get to say whatever.
Final
you want.
answer. Elf. Watch Elf.
That's spectacular.
Yeah.
All right.
Elf.
What is one quote that you live by?
In this moment is the essence of everything glorious I've been given in life, and it is enough. Joan Chittister. I'll say it again. In this moment is the essence of everything glorious I've been given in life, and it is enough.
That's beautiful. That's beautiful. I was going to try to write that down, but as soon as you got past like word 5, there was no way I was going to be able to keep writing it.
That's a long one.
That's spectacular. This one may take a little bit longer. What is your morning routine?
Morning routine. I started coffee at the age of 41. I say it to my church, and I had never received that level of support. People actually clapped, and I was like, I'm taking a drug now, people. Like caffeine, it's a great drug. It's a wonderful drug. So morning routine, I know you're not supposed to drink coffee within the first 90 minutes of waking up. So sue me, Andrew Huberman, sue me. My routine on an ideal morning. Okay. Wake up. I will drink some coffee. I really am just trying to consume caffeine. So do this and the milk and no, I literally drink it. I put ice in it and then I chug it. That's how I do coffee. I don't like the taste of it. I love the smell of it and I love caffeine. That's all I care about. Okay. So I'm caffeinated immediately after I got a good night's sleep. And then I'll spend 15 minutes doing mobility work while listening to a various collection of contemplative kind of worship music. And then I will read my Bible. I'll have solitude. I'll do some breathing work. And I'll do that for a while. And then I'll go in my garage. I'll work out. I'll eat the same thing I eat every day, half a dozen eggs, 3 egg whites, 3 full eggs, an avocado and some salsa, and a Carb Smart tortilla. And then I'll work for 2 hours, and then I'll go to jujitsu, and then I'll have meetings with people. That's my ideal day.
That's spectacular. Now, what time are you typically waking up?
Well, it depends on my little jerk kids. Like they never let me sleep in. They're rude. No, this morning I got up like at 6:30. And so some of this is going to be different. My wife, we do things different each day. But sometimes it'll be like, I'll, take my first kid to school. I have 3 kids at 3 different schools, which is a fun experience. You might have one day. And, so it's like, take her to school and then get back. And then I'll do like meditation and stuff. And I'll take another kid to school and then I'll lift and then on whatever. So it changes, but on a day where their schedule is not, affecting mine, that's what it would look like.
Wow. That's impressive. That is quite the morning routine. Even just the sheer number of eggs that you consume first thing in the morning is impressive, to say the least. So, but is it 6 and 3 egg whites?
No. 3 full eggs and 3 just egg whites. We're working on 40 to 50 grams of protein per meal.
Yeah, there you go. That's spectacular. Okay. I love that. Maybe one day we'll get you into like proper coffee drinking. But we'll get you there. It'll take some time. For now,
what I did? Because I had a long afternoon, and so I just got a cup of coffee. I put ice in it, got it a little bit chilled, and I straight up chugged it. That's what I do. That's how I want my caffeine. I like the smell and I like the caffeine. That's all I'm here for.
That is so good. That is so good. All right. So in the spirit of meals, if you had to eat one meal every day for the rest of your life, what would
I already
it be?
do that. I'm a mono eater.
That was a dumb question.
I eat egg whites for breakfast. I eat ground turkey and sweet potato for my afternoon meal. I'll have a protein shake, which is banana, blueberries, whey protein with creatine and ice. And at night I do yogurt with fruit. And then usually dinner is like, it changes with the family, but I pretty much eat the same meal most days. And it's really boring. Don't encourage that. Don't encourage that.
No. It's effective because you're 42 and look the way that you do, and I'm 29 and I've gained 20 pounds since I started having children. So there's that simple reality.
Okay, well, I won't respond to that. But
yet, at my leanest times, what I did was eat the same breakfast every day, the same lunch every day, and pretty much the same dinner every night. So if that's any testament to what the next 6 months is going to look like for me, hopefully it's relatively effective. Okay, final question, because I know you got places to be, and I want to respect your time. If you could get in an airplane right now, and it's an airplane that, let's just say, has like supersonic speed, you can be anywhere in the world in 1 hour. You can hop in at Austin and you can be anywhere in an hour, and you can take anyone that you want to.
Okay.
Where would you go, and who are you taking with you?
I judge every year of my life based on where I got to swim. And so it's going to be a beach. There's going to be my family. We're going. And I've never been to Italy. And I would go to some beach in Italy because I've never been there. Honestly, I don't care. Wherever it's a fun place, nice, warm water, clear. I can swim. My wife won't go swim because she just doesn't do that. But I'll take my kids out in the water and we'll swim and the beach somewhere. So let's just say Italy.
That sounds amazing. I love let's judge the quality of our year based on where we swim. That's a beautiful way to live our life. Well, Luke, thank you. Thank you for the work that you do, for the kingdom, both locally at your church, but also the ways that you have continued to help people navigate faith in the digital modern world that we live in. Thank you for the influence that you've had on my life. I am deeply, deeply grateful for your words and for your presence. And I'm really grateful that you have taken the past hour and a few minutes to spend an afternoon with me, a random stranger, and hopefully now a friend that we can develop a relationship with in the future. And we'll have to have you back on because you've got a book coming out in April.
I do.
And I'm really excited about that. I can't wait to read it. So hopefully we'll have you back on then, and we can chat all about the new book.
Sounds like a plan. Kyle, thanks for the time, man. Thanks for hospitality. And hey, congrats on the podcast. Happy for you. And again, thank you for your kind words. It has been my honor to talk with you.
Appreciate it, my friend. If you're listening on audio or you are watching on YouTube, be sure to share this one with a friend because I guarantee it'll be a blessing for them. Grace and peace, my friends. Have an amazing day.